You stand at Giza 4,500 years ago, beside a limestone block heavier than a car. Above you, the unfinished Great Pyramid rises from the plateau like an artificial mountain. Your block belongs near the top. But no crane, engine, or steel cable exists anywhere in Egypt. You have wooden sledges, plant fiber ropes, copper tools, stone pounders, water, and human muscle. Moving the block across level ground is difficult enough. Raising it onto the monument seems impossible. And behind your block, thousands more are waiting in the quarry. How could an ancient society repeat this challenge for years without the entire operation collapsing? Workers clear loose rubble from the bedrock beneath the future pyramid. The Great Pyramid was commissioned for Pharaoh Khufu during Egypt's 4th dynasty. That conclusion rests on several clues rather than one enormous royal inscription. Inside hidden spaces above the king's chamber, workers painted names and administrative markings onto stone. Some markings mention labor crews associated with Khufu. Nearby quarries preserve channels, unfinished blocks, tool marks, and debris from large-scale stone extraction. Cemeteries around Giza contain people connected with the royal building projects. South of the Sphinx, archaeologists uncovered a settlement that supported the pyramid workforce. Its workshops, storage areas, bakeries, animal bones, and ceilings reveal an organized royal operation. Then papyri discovered far from Giza supplied another connection. An official named Merer recorded transporting fine limestone to Akhet Khufu, meaning Khufu's horizon. That was the ancient name of the Great Pyramid. The surviving papyrus ends without explaining how workers raised the stones. The monument originally rose about 146 meters above the plateau. Its square base covered more than 5 hectares. Each side measured roughly 230 meters, yet the 4 sides had to meet at precise corners. Most core blocks weighed several tons, while selected granite pieces were many times heavier. Approximately 2.3 million blocks may have been used, although estimates vary with assumptions about the interior. Every low course required an enormous number of stones. Every higher course required fewer stones, but lifting them became increasingly difficult. Internal chambers also had to appear at planned positions within the growing mass. A small mistake near the base could spread upward through the entire structure. So where did the necessary knowledge come from? Egyptian builders had already spent generations experimenting with monumental tombs before Khufu reached the throne. These tombs were called mastabas. Under Djoser, builders stacked increasingly smaller stone levels to create the step pyramid at Saqqara. Later projects attempted to transform stepped monuments into pyramids with continuous sloping faces. The pyramid at Medum preserves evidence of major design changes, while its present condition remains debated. Sneferu's bent pyramid changed to a shallower angle partway upward, possibly in response to structural concerns. His red pyramid then maintained a safer angle from its lower courses to its summit. Every failure preserved another lesson. Before quarrying millions of blocks, surveyors first had to control the plateau beneath the monument. They cleared loose debris until firm limestone bedrock could support the pyramid's immense weight. Workers marked straight baselines across an area larger than several football fields. Wooden stakes and stretched cords could preserve measured lines between fixed points. Repeated observations of stars may have helped surveyors establish the north-south direction. The exact method remains unknown. A surveyor repeats each measurement before moving the wooden marker. Surveyors repeatedly checked opposing sides and corner positions before heavy construction concealed their reference marks. The base also needed to remain remarkably level across uneven natural rock. Workers may have used water-filled trenches or other leveling methods to identify high sections. Only after cutting those sections down could the first masonry courses begin. Fortunately, the builders were standing above much of the material they needed. Quarries opened directly beside the Great Pyramid. Workers outlined limestone blocks by cutting channels into the exposed bedrock. Dolerite pounders battered resistant surfaces, while copper and stone tools worked the softer limestone. Once channels surrounded a block, workers cut underneath or exploited natural bedding planes. Wooden levers could help separate the loosened stone from the quarry floor. Rough blocks then moved a relatively short distance toward the pyramid. Core masonry did not require every face to be polished. Workers could trim contact points while filling hidden gaps with smaller stones and mortar. This reduced the labor spent perfecting surfaces nobody would see. But the gleaming outer casing demanded a different material. Fine white casing limestone came largely from Tura, across the Nile from Giza. These visible stones required more accurate cutting and fitting than rough internal blocks. Copper tools appear too soft to slice stone efficiently by themselves. The missing cutting edge was sand. Quartz grains placed beneath a copper saw could grind limestone as the blade moved repeatedly. The copper guided abrasive particles instead of defeating the stone through hardness alone. Bow drills may have used similar abrasives to create holes and circular depressions. The process consumed time, sand, tools, and trained labor. Then granite made everything harder. Builders selected granite for the king's chamber, portcullis system, and other important structural elements. Much of it came from the Aswan region, hundreds of kilometers south of Giza. At the quarry, workers pounded grooves into granite using heavy dolerite stones. One blow achieved almost nothing. Thousands of blows gradually deepened each groove until workers could isolate the required mass. Abrasive saws and drills could refine selected surfaces, although progress remained slow. The largest granite beams weighed several dozen tons and demanded exceptional handling, yet such giants formed only a tiny fraction of the pyramid's total masonry. A granite block waits beside the Nile, hundreds of kilometers from Giza. A papyrus diary written by an official named Merer illuminates one part of that journey. Merer supervised a crew during Khufu's reign. His records follow repeated voyages between the Tura quarry region and Akhet Khufu. At Tura, crews loaded fine limestone onto transport boats. They then sailed through waterways connected to the Nile. The diary describes stops, working days, and deliveries within a tightly supervised system. A loaded boat approaches Giza with limestone stacked across its wooden deck. Merer's crew unloads limestone beside the harbor. Merer's crew was not necessarily responsible for quarrying or positioning every delivered block. Their task formed one link in a much larger chain. Other officials coordinated provisions, harbor activity, labor assignments, and construction schedules. A scribe checks arriving boats against Merer's written schedule. Administration kept the deliveries moving. The Nile served as Egypt's largest transportation route. A load-resisting movement across land could travel much farther while supported by water. Granite from southern Egypt could descend the river toward Giza, aboard large wooden vessels. Fine casing limestone crossed from the eastern side of the Nile. Canals, basins, and seasonal waterways brought cargo closer to the pyramid complexes. Reconstructed ancient landscapes suggest water once reached areas now separated from the river by modern development. But boats did not eliminate the labor. Crews still loaded each stone, balanced its weight, secured it, and unloaded it safely. A cracked hull or broken rope could destroy months of quarry work. A cargo boat carries stones that would be extremely difficult to drag overland. The final distance still crossed land. For that stage, workers could place heavy blocks onto wooden sledges. A sledge spread the load across broad runners instead of concentrating it beneath narrow wheels. Teams attached thick ropes and pulled together along a prepared route. Yet dry sand accumulated like a wave in front of the runners. That wave increased resistance. Experiments show that carefully dampened sand can become firmer and reduce material piling before a sledge. Too little water leaves the grains loose, while too much creates an equally troublesome muddy surface. Path workers therefore had to prepare and maintain the route before the hauling team arrived. A leader could coordinate each pull so dozens of workers applied force at the same moment. Rhythm multiplied their strength. Every successful delivery consumed far more than muscle. Rope makers twisted plant fibers into thick cables, then replaced strands worn by stone hauling. Sledges also wore down. Carpenters repaired wooden runners after repeated journeys across abrasive ground. Meanwhile, bakers and brewers prepared daily provisions for thousands of workers. Nothing moved without supplies. South of the Sphinx, archaeologists uncovered a settlement linked to the Giza projects. Long galleries may have housed rotating labor crews. Nearby workshops repaired tools, sledges, and other construction equipment. Large bakeries produced food beyond ordinary household needs. Animal bones suggest some workers received substantial meat rations. Storage rooms held goods awaiting distribution across the settlement. Royal seals marked the administration. This was a construction town. Some laborers may have served seasonally, while specialists remained for longer periods. Its total population remains uncertain. Excavated housing does not support the familiar image of chained foreign slaves. Instead, the evidence suggests organized Egyptian labor under royal supervision. Large crews were divided again. Painted markings preserve the names of smaller work groups. Quarry teams freed blocks while haulers waited beside prepared routes. Stone dressers shaped contact surfaces before final placement. Surveyors protected measurements unknown to many ordinary pullers. Carpenters repaired sledges as rope makers replaced fraying cables. Scribes counted every delivery. Foremen adjusted crews whenever one construction stage slowed. Coordination replaced the crowd. But one challenge remained: height. Ramps were probably involved, although no complete Great Pyramid ramp survives. A broad straight ramp could serve the wide lower courses. Near the summit, however, that ramp would require an enormous volume of material. Wrapping ramps saved frontal space. But corners might disappear. Zigzagging ramps could leave other faces open for work. Short ramps might move upward as construction advanced. Hatnub preserves a steep quarry ramp apparently dating to Khufu's reign. Post holes beside it once anchored ropes for hauling sledges uphill. But Hatnub was not Giza. Its ramp proves contemporary knowledge, not the pyramid's exact design. Lower levels offered space for several broad hauling lanes. Higher levels narrowed every route. There, short ramps could lift sledges between neighboring courses. Wooden levers may have shifted blocks through smaller vertical steps. Workers could hold each raised stone on stacked wooden supports. Heavy granite beams demanded stronger ropes, prepared routes, and larger teams. Different heights may have required different lifting systems. Height created another danger. Surveyors likely rechecked each newly completed stone course. Stretched cords marked straight edges across the working surface. Plumb lines checked vertical references. Measuring rods reproduced planned distances. Diagonal checks exposed a rectangular course drifting out of square. Visible corners preserved reference points. Each completed course offered a fresh surface for correcting deviations. Core stones could remain rough behind the exterior line. Casing stones demanded precision. Surveyors inspect the casing line before approving the next course. As the pyramid rose, builders also had to preserve chambers inside the growing masonry. A passage floor began in daylight. Workers raised its walls, then lowered heavy ceiling blocks into position. More masonry buried the chamber. Workers were not always crawling through sealed darkness. The grand gallery required corbelled walls that narrowed carefully as each new course rose. Massive granite blocks formed the king's chamber. Overhead, granite beams and open spaces may have redirected part of the structural load. Some granite beams still cracked, yet the chamber survived. Dark corridors inspired questions about soot. Oil lamps burning inside sealed corridors should leave smoke marks on the ceilings. But many passages were built from above. Daylight reached the walls before ceiling stones enclosed them. Some darkness remained unavoidable. Small oil lamps could illuminate those areas temporarily. Workers might later clean ceremonial surfaces. The surviving walls cannot prove electric lighting. Another popular calculation divides millions of blocks across roughly 20 years of construction. It allows only minutes per block. But that calculation imagines a single production line. Many quarry teams cut stones simultaneously. Boats delivered loads while earlier cargo was unloaded. Sledges traveled on separate routes. Placement crews worked while surveyors checked courses and craftsmen prepared future blocks. Core stones needed less finishing than visible casing. The pace probably changed as the pyramid narrowed. Exact daily output remains unknown. Many crews worked at once. Then, an empty stone container inside the pyramid raises another important question. Was it Khufu's sarcophagus? No confirmed royal body remained inside. Yet the pyramid stood within a much larger funerary complex. Temples, causeways, subsidiary monuments, and cemeteries surrounded it. Many royal tombs were robbed before modern excavation. Missing treasure proves little. Workers' markings connect construction activity with Khufu's reign. Merer's diary links royal officials, Tura limestone, and Akhet Khufu. No single clue answers every ritual question. Together, the evidence supports Khufu's funerary project. But the complete shape of the pyramid's ramp system remains unknown. Temporary ramps could disappear after construction. Their material may have been reused or scattered. No daily schedule survived. The heaviest granite beams present an even harder lifting mystery. No record explains their final ascent. Even the method for finding true north remains debated. Internal design changes also require further study. Not every theory fits. Several lifting methods may have worked together. Modern instruments can now investigate spaces hidden behind the pyramid's stone. Muon detectors track particles arriving naturally from the atmosphere. Open spaces allow more particles to reach the detectors. In 2017, scan pyramids detected a large void above the Grand Gallery. The scan revealed the void's approximate position and scale. Its purpose remains unknown. In 2023, researchers documented a corridor behind the chevron-shaped stones on the pyramid's north face. A small camera revealed a rough corridor beneath a chevron-shaped stone ceiling. Neither discovery proves lost technology. They demonstrate that parts of the Great Pyramid remain physically unexplored. The internal map keeps changing. Now return to your limestone block waiting beneath the unfinished pyramid. No single worker can move it. A quarry crew frees it, while stone dressers prepare the surfaces needed for transport. A sledge team pulls it toward waterways managed by boat crews, scribes, and administrators. Another team hauls it upward as surveyors mark the position where it must finally rest. The missing machine was not one device. Quarrymen, sailors, haulers, surveyors, craftsmen, and scribes work across one construction site. Your block joins the mountain, and the Great Pyramid rises one human solution at a time.